So like you have a major role in diagnosing it, as in catching the disease as early as possible.
More than neurology, neurosurgery, I like to call them neurosciences.
Patient, those who exercise 30 minutes in a day, good cardio workup, they have a good collateral channeling in the brain.
So which exercises are these? Are these strength training exercises or are they aerobic exercises?
If I'm telling somebody to do exercise, even for a migraine patient, madam, time nahi hai, that is the answer.
What I want to know is is fasting important? It's very common.
Very common
these
days.
days.
It become trend nowadays.
It has become a trend, yeah.
So where my brain is going to get the glucose from? I'll get the oxygen, but where the glucose will come from?
So people should not do this.
I'm not very sure about that.
People should never do this, I feel.
Hi guys. So we have created a series of podcasts to raise awareness. Awareness about what? Awareness about brain stroke. And why? That's because globally, brain stroke is the commonest cause of morbidity. And especially so in Southeast Asian countries like India, where the stroke burden is the highest. And as a matter of fact, it is very concerning also because it is affecting youngsters. And as you guys know, youngsters are the backbone of this country. So we have invited various medical experts, neurologists, neurosurgeons, cardiologists, ophthalmologists, radiologists, to talk about brain stroke and give their vital piece of information, their perspective regarding the same. Now, this whole campaign is being created by a charitable organization called as Purva Medical Trust. And the name of this project is Project Brainline. Now, the main aim of Project Brainline is to create awareness about brain stroke and to create a network of primary stroke care centers throughout the country so that they can respond to stroke and they can treat stroke in the best possible way in the fastest time. And also, from this whole campaign, you will get the vital information necessary to prevent stroke in the first place. And that's why I hope you guys find these series of podcasts valuable, practical, and useful in your daily life. And I hope you guys give us your valuable support. Thank you. So guys, today we have Dr. Aarti Kulkarni on the podcast. Dr. Aarti is a neurologist. Previously, we have had neurosurgeons on the podcast, and even our own neurosurgeon, Dr. Ashok Khande, is going to join Dr. Aarti ma'am in this podcast. So we are going to get opinions from a neurosurgeon, from a neurologist, and we are going to get the whole picture. So that's why I hope you derive a lot of value from this podcast and you watch it till the very end, क्योंकि हमको समझना है कि स्ट्रोक अगर होता है पेशेंट को तो उसको मेडिकली कैसे मैनेज कर सकते हैं मेडिसिन्स के सहारे. And that's why I request you guys to watch it till the end, and I hope you derive a lot of value from it. Thank you. So, ma'am, what I want to ask to ma'am and to sir also is that for the viewers, for the common people, what is the difference between a neurologist and a neurosurgeon? What does a neurologist do and what does a neurosurgeon do?
Neurology basically refers cases to neurosurgeon for surgery.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is like a difference between a physician and a surgeon. Okay. If you see the difference in definition, neurologist basically will examine the patient, take the history, come to diagnosis, and treat the patient. But any of the patient who requires surgery, then those cases are referred to the neurosurgeons.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So basically, neurologists are physicians. We are physicians. We are being trained over a period of maybe more than 1 decade just to understand the neurology, concept of neurology, where is the localization, what is the possible diagnosis, and how we can treat that, whether it's a medical option or surgical option. If the surgical option comes, definitely we ask neurosurgeon to take over the case and the surgery would be done by them. If the medical options are there, definitely we treat them with the medicine and with the neuro rehabilitation, and over a period of time they get better.
So like you have a major role in diagnosing it, as in catching the disease as early as possible. Am I
Definitely, yes.
right? Right. So
In fact, if you see in any neuroscience center, neurologists form, I think, the primary consulting doctor. Always. They are the one who, come to a diagnosis, decide what is to be done. But there is a gray zone also in neurology and neurosurgery. There are certain things which you can manage just with the medicines. There are certain things, which also, even if I recommend surgery for that thing, it is not going to be wrong. For example, there is something called trigeminal neuralgia,
okay.
where the pain shoots along the face while you're talking, while you're speaking. It is a very sharp shooting pain. And I have seen people who have committed suicide because the pain is so bad, So now there are very good medicines which you can give and that pain can be subsided, So neurologists probably will try that out first, medicine. If there are some side effects of the medicine or medicine becoming too much or pain is not coming under control with the medication, then probably they refer to the neurosurgeon for surgical intervention. But there are certain neurosurgeons, they will advise for the surgery right in the beginning, instead of waiting for the medicine to take their own effect. So there are certain gray zones, But I would always thought right from the beginning, more than neurology and neurosurgery, I like to call them neurosciences, because we all work as a team.
Right, right.
So there is a difference for the layman, like different between physician, surgeon. But if you call this a neuroscience team, then I think all of us come together.
And ma'am, what I want to ask you is, what are the common myths or common misconceptions that people have about stroke?
So when it comes to a stroke diagnosis, most of the time the stroke is not identified only. What is stroke? Means anything which what we call, as a neurologist, we call anything which happens acutely. Sudden onset of difficulty in speaking, sudden onset of difficulty in understanding, any paralysis in any of the body limbs. It is not identified by the people, first of all. Secondly, they will think the stroke as something like related to the heart. Maybe it is coming from the heart, but they will not understand it is coming from the brain. Sometimes the weakness of the arm can be considered as maybe a part of what you call epilepsy. Maybe कुछ मिर्गी जैसे हुआ उसके बाद हाथ हिल नहीं रहा है, but actually the stroke is going on in the background. And the awareness amongst the people is also not good about understanding the stroke pathophysiology. So most of the time they do not come to us, they go to some other doctor. From their side also most of the time the misdiagnosis happen. So for a layman person to understand anything which happens in your life acutely, it is unless proven otherwise it is stroke. Stroke means there is a circulation to the brain is getting interrupted and the patient is having acute onset of the symptom. It can be anything. It can be related to your eye, it can be headache, acute onset of paralysis, acute onset of facial deviation. Anything can happen which is happening acutely within fraction of seconds or minutes without any warning signs. So that is nothing but the stroke. That one has to understand that. And the stroke, when it comes to a stroke, we are dealing with the brain. We are not dealing with the heart. We are not dealing with the kidneys. We are not dealing with the intestine. We are purely dealing with the brain. That understanding has to be there amongst the common population to identify and to reach to the stroke ready center or to a neurologist on time.
Right, because that is one thing. And then now there is a rising issue of stroke which is happening in the younger population. And that is why this question is very important for the listeners. That can stroke happen in young people? As a neurologist, what have you seen? How young patients have you seen having stroke?
Well, yes, definitely it happens in the young people. We have seen a lot of patients. The youngest we have seen up to the age of 18 years, what we can see. We are seeing stroke in the pediatric population also. So recently, I'm treating 2 stroke patients. One is 21 years, one is 28 years. So nowadays, of late, last 5 years, we are seeing a lot of young generations, they are getting stroke because of some or the other risk factor. Definitely, we'll be discussing about those risk factors later on. But yes, the stroke is common in young patients also. Nowadays, it has become more common. Previously, we used to think it happens only after the age of 60 years, but it is not the case. And I feel being Indian, it's a risk factor for having stroke. If you're an Indian, at any point of your lifetime, you can have a stroke.
Maybe because we have had bad genetics, something
that
like
can
that.
also be a reason, and the epigenetics, what we call the
Epigenetics.
environmental changes. Maybe we are not very much active. The physical exercises, environmental changes, genetic factor is altogether different. Epigenetics, when we talk, it is about the environmental changes what are happening around the patient.
The environment affects your genes, based changes in your genes.
Yeah, yes.
This is areas.
And at the same time, the lack of activities, lot of risk factors, addictions, which is more common in the younger population nowadays, excessive use of gadgets. These are the all risk factor over a period of years. Maybe they're playing a part in development of stroke.
Okay.
There was an article which was published in Journal of Annals of Neurology in 2023, where they have done a prospective study of why the stroke is very common in young people. Now, it was a prospective study, and what they have concluded in that particular study was the India is a very diverse kind of a country, and the Indian system is such what we call as a three-tier system: primary, second, and tertiary tier system. Primary tier system basically works at the district level. Then you go to the cities, and then obviously go to the tertiary center, which are in say places like Pune and Mumbai, things like that. Unfortunately, the basic medical facilities which are provided in our country, they are provided by the general physicians of general practitioners. And general practitioner need not be MBBS. He can be anything. He can be BHMS, can be Ayurvedic practice. And by default, we Indians tend to go to the general practitioner for the illness first. Now there comes the problem. Once they reach this basic ring, which forms the entire base of the pyramid of Indian medical system, your diagnosis can be missed completely. So there are many cases which are misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, undertreated, So that number is very high. And as Aarti said that unless and until patient comes to you in time, the stroke, you will definitely miss out on the stroke. So by the time patient reaches from this base of the pyramid till the second and tertiary care center, a lot of people are missing out on the early treatment for the stroke. So this is one of the reasons why the stroke in young are also increasing, because they are not diagnosed. They are missed out. Apart from the lifestyle changes, they are missed out completely. And about the myth that what you asked, Dr. Aarti, some time ago, there is, in India, myth can go to any extent, any extent. If you get a paralysis, the treatment of choice that time was massaging the arm using different kind of oils, That was a treatment, which is well accepted treatment. We did not know it is because of brain stroke, it could have been prevented, it could have been treated. So the traditional method of treating brain stroke was massaging. When I was in Jaslok Hospital, there was one guy, DSP, he had a stroke and he had a clot inside one of the arteries. So he was told to undergo intervention. He said, I don't want to do any intervention, but I know one Baba who was in Delhi. I will go there and get myself treated. So he went to Delhi. I'm talking of a person who is a DCP level. He went to Delhi. Baba did something, and when Baba did something in front of his, and then he opened his raised fist and showed, see, this was the one which was blocking. He showed him the clot. This is the one which was blocking your artery. So you're cured. You don't need any intervention. And this guy came home. 1 week later, he came back with a full-blown brain stroke. So what I'm trying to say, people believe those kind of things rather than believing science. And then it's become very difficult for people like us to convince that this is the right thing and that is wrong thing. What you did is wrong thing.
Right. And ma'am, when you said that these young people are coming to you with stroke, so are all of them, do they look unhealthy? Do they have high BMI, wrong lifestyle? Or does it happen, it can happen in anybody?
Actually, there are a lot of risk factors, what we can call the young generations are also having nowadays. So there are few risk factors, and the few of them are the disease which are giving rise to the stroke problems. So talking about the risk factors first, definitely the lack of activities, excessive use of mobiles, computers for a longer time, not doing exercises, using mobile overnight. So that is increasing the chemical imbalance in the brain. Over a period of time, lot of metabolic syndromes. Metabolic syndromes means I'm talking about patients, young generations are having hypertension, diabetes, obesity. These are what we call as metabolic syndrome. These are very common in the younger population. And these are the hardcore precursors for getting strokes. So hypertension, diabetes, obesity, lack of physical activity, cholesterol issues like a dyslipidemia, the lipid problems, what we are saying. So that is also a risk factor. At the same time, what I found in a lot of younger generation addictions, smoking, alcohol intake, some of them are taking drugs. So these are the patients, those who are at more risk for getting strokes. Few of them, they take cocaine, they're taking some marijuana. So any of this, if any young generation people are taking, definitely. I have seen a lot of females also, they have started smoking. So these are the risk factors over a period of years. Maybe they are likely to have some or the other atherosclerotic disease. Either they will end up getting strokes or heart attacks or any kidney related issues. At the same time, what we are seeing nowadays, vitamin B12 deficiency. That is the main cause for getting young strokes. B12 deficiency. And most commonly, if you'll ask me, vitamin B12 deficiency, India is the main hub for having vitamin B12 deficiency because most of the patients are vegetarian. The intake is not enough, and the only vitamin B12 source is which we get it is in the non-vegetarian food substances. So when the vitamin B12 deficiency sets in, definitely it can cause clotting. It can induce a clotting phenomenon in the brain or in the heart, and patient can land up in the hospital with the strokes. So identifying vitamin B12 deficiency at every doctor's level, right from what sir said, either from BAMS, BHMS, MD, MBBS, MD medicine, super specialty, and treating that deficiency is also important in order to prevent further occurrence of complications which we are likely to expect when it comes to the brain. So these are the risk factors what we are talking about. The etiological factors may be different, and accordingly we have to treat, investigate, evaluate, and finally we have to take the patient out of the stroke complication.
Because ma'am, the thing is,
Before that, Arvi, can only isolated vitamin B12 deficiency lead to a stroke?
Definitely, why not?
Just one isolated entity.
that is what I was
Yes,
going
yes.
to ask.
Oh,
Because
for
we have
how
seen
long?
a lot of patients, we have done all the workup, means we have ended up doing more than 80,000-90,000 of tests for the patient because patient is young stroke and we don't want that stroke to come again later on in the future, in his lifetime. And we have done all the possible tests for the patient. And only one test, what we have found abnormal is the low vitamin B12 or the homocysteine, which is on the higher side. And that can be also a risk factor for getting stroke. So only one problem can be enough to get a stroke, in my experience.
But ma'am, we are primarily a vegetarian country, India, if you see. And like you said, in people who eat vegetarian food, B12 is low most of the times. So that means all of the vegetarian people, are they at a higher risk of getting stroke? Is it something like that?
We cannot generalize that statement. Maybe we can just say people, those are vegetarian, they should do their periodic vitamin B12
B12
testing.
at least.
Not all patients or those who are vegetarian, they will get strokes. Not every individual. Why not so? Because in vegetarian patients, the intestines, which are the large intestine, the colon, where the lot of bacteria, they ferment and they form vitamin B12. And naturally, if you see their levels in most of the patients, even though they are pure vegetarian, the levels are maintained. In few patients, even though these mechanisms are happening, they're not happening at the fullest capacity. And the vitamin B12 levels or the stores, they remain on the lower side, below 150 or below 100. So we call them as vitamin B12 deficient population. So ideally, a person who is vegetarian, they should do the periodic vitamin B12 testing and they should get it corrected as early as possible in order to prevent neurological complication. If you'll ask me, for a neurologist, vitamin B12 is like, it's our favorite vitamin B12. Means we know vitamin B12 will going to cause a lot of neurological complication, right from strokes, dementias, vascular events, spinal cord problems, neuropathies. So we want every patient who is coming to us with the deficiency, we try to correct and we try to give them a maintenance dose also so that over a period of time, everything would remain in the stable level or whatever the desired level of vitamin B12.
But then for how long, if the vitamin B12 is deficient, will may it lead to stroke? And then usually the patients are deficient in vitamin B12 and they don't even know it. but how long can they go like that and not have anything? As in, how long does it take for the stroke to appear?
Actually, there are two things in that. See, vitamin B12, to have a deficiency for any person who has a good vitamin B12 stores in the body, for the liver store to get depleted, it takes around a time of 3 to 4 months. If the vitamin B12 is low or if it is going below the range of 150, what we say, at any point of time, anything can happen. So it is always better to correct. Exact duration we cannot comment upon because there are a lot of other factors also playing a role. Sometimes the winter plays a role. In winter, we see a lot of stroke patient because of increased sympathetic activity in the body. So a lot of stroke patient, if you see in the winter season, there are more as compared to the summer season and the rainy season.
Okay, ma'am.
So in the winter, we see daily 1 or 2 stroke patients.
Sympathetic activity. When you say sympathetic
Means
activity,
the
how do we
increase,
tell that to?
what you call increase neuronal activities in the brain, or the autonomic nervous system of the brain is more active in the winter season. So definitely other factors play a role when it comes to vitamin B12 deficiency, and we have to treat it as early as possible.
Okay. And is the incidence, so this was about vitamin B12, but if we see incidences in males as compared to females, so is it different or is it the same?
See, in the males, definitely the strokes are more common as compared to females. But in females, if you see about the young females, the causes for stroke are different. Maybe use of oral contraceptives or hormonal pills that can also play an additional effect on the brain. When it comes to the older population, definitely after the 60, the risk gets equalized in both the genders. Like it is equally seen in the males as compared to female. But definitely the males, they are at more risk. We always call a male gender more than 60. These are the common risk factors. But nowadays we have started seeing strokes in the females also, younger females also coming to us with the stroke. So definitely whatever has been given in the books over a period of so many years, that scenario is changing. In of late, in last 4 or 5 years, we are seeing in all type of age groups, irrespective of the gender, we are seeing patient. But still, I feel it is more common in males as compared to female. But the female numbers are rising nowadays.
Also,
I'd like to quote some numbers here, scientific numbers. In 2003, around that time, the incidence of young stroke was about 4 people in 1,000 population, 1 lakh population. I mean, 4 or 5 people getting affected in 1 lakh population. If you see now, it has now gone up by 10%, 10
Okay.
times. Now the incidence of young strokes is happening at the incidence of 40 to 50 young strokes per lakh of population. 10-fold increase in just 10 years. No, that's a huge number. And there is another figure which I would like to quote, that among the young strokes, young stroke I'm talking at the age of say 38, 40, 48% are women. 48%.
so almost half are women.
Almost equal to men. So they are competing with the men now. The issues are increasing because one of the reasons what that described is using a lot of hormones, oral contraceptives, all these IV treatment which goes for artificial pregnancies. I think a lot of things are responsible, but women are not behind anymore now. They are competing equally with male. And this age group, what I'm talking about, between 28 to 40, is one of the worst age group because the number of obese people, they are maximum in this. As Arthi is saying, the lack of exercises, working from home, staying alone, having a lot of depression, anxiety, eating any kind of a food stuff. The obesity is maximum between the age of 28 and 38. And that is where the peak of young strokes are rising. It is scientifically proven. We are number 2 in obesity in the entire world. Can you imagine that? Next to China.
Now next to China. And ma'am, when you said vitamin B12, so say for example somebody is deficient and then they find it out in that routine test, in a blood test, and then they start taking vitamin B12 and then their levels come back to normal. But then for how long is the patient protected even when the levels are back to normal? Because the patient then will need to, I think, keep checking it again and again.
It is better to do the periodic checkup. As I said, it cannot be the only one factor in most of the patient. The other confounding factors can also play a role in development of the stroke. But patient, once a vitamin B12 deficient, it is ideal to check levels every 1 year.
Every 1 year.
Every year. So in order to know whether the levels are within the range.
Right. And how can we detect stroke early, as early as possible?
Detection of stroke as early as possible means, if you'll ask that question, the stroke happens acutely. It will happen acutely to any individual. Acutely means immediately. Now I'm sitting, immediately if I stop talking, or suddenly my hand, if I'm not able to lift, that is stroke. So more than understanding the stroke pathophysiology, it is understanding the stroke symptoms are very much important. In most of the stroke patients, we don't get any pre-monitoring signs.
Okay.
Like in few patients, we get something called as maybe 2-3 days before he had a difficulty in speaking or difficulty in holding objects. It lasted for 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Then patient recovered. Patient ignored that symptom, and later on he came with full-blown paralysis.
Pre-monitoring signs are some things
symptoms
which might happen before the actual stroke is happening.
Yes. So these we call, in the scientific terminology for that, is transient ischemic attack. So means the brain is giving you the signs that the stroke is about to happen. Better you reach to the hospital on time. If these pre-monitoring symptoms are missed by the patient, not identified or not neglected, sometimes this patient end up in getting big time full-blown stroke. This understanding pre-monitoring sign, for that, as we always say, that sir has already spoken about
Warning signs.
Warning signs. So in the last podcast, he has spoken about something called as the bed fast. So understanding those symptoms means acute onset of blurring of vision, balance problem, dizziness, giddiness, headache, or speech problem, difficulty in using hands or the leg, difficulty in swallowing. This problem needs to be identified by the patient, and they have to reach to the hospital on time. If they're reaching on time, we can treat it faster and the recovery is better. So this could be the signs which patient has to identify. Unlike in heart attack, most of the time when the chest pain happens, you can give aspirin at home. They can buy a time till the time they're reaching a hospital. In stroke patient, they have no other option. They have to visit neurologist and they have to get necessary imaging done. Without imaging, we cannot give any further treatment to the patient. So doing CT scan or a MRI, whatever imaging technology is what we are using, without doing that, we cannot treat the patient. So that's why the patient has to reach the hospital also on time.
See, that's the worst part of brain stroke. Heart stroke can be treated at home. And heart stroke patient, if he gets a chest pain, he can always call some help. He can go to neighbor, he can wake up his wife, or he can wake up his son or something. Or sometimes heart attack can be treated at home, by taking some medications. Brain stroke cannot be treated at home. He has to reach a hospital. And if he gets paralyzed, suppose he loses speech or loses power in the hand, he can't hold the phone. He can't go to anybody. He can't even talk to anybody. See, that is a problem where the brain stroke overrides heart attack. So it's a very serious consequences brain stroke can have.
And I think, sir, I think ma'am mentioned about homocysteine. Now everybody has heard about cholesterol. So cholesterol is going to block the arteries and it can reduce the blood supply, and that is how stroke can be caused. But what is this homocysteine and how is it dangerous for us?
So basically, homocysteine is nothing but it is indirect precursor of vitamin B12. So how vitamin B12 is getting metabolized in the body. So homocysteine is nothing but what we call it is inversely proportional to the amount of vitamin B12 which you have. So if the vitamin B12 is low, the homocysteine goes high. If the vitamin B12 is normal or it is on the higher side, homocysteine goes low. If the homocysteine is on the higher side, it is atherogenic. Atherogenic means it induces the atherosclerotic process. At the same time, it is thrombogenic, means it induces the thrombus, clot formation in the arteries. So that artery could be of any artery. It can be artery of brain, it can be artery of heart or of the kidneys, and patient can end up getting any vascular events. So treating homocysteine by treating vitamin B12, it is very much important. There are certain genetic disorders where homocysteine gets elevated and it runs in the family, what we call familial hyperhomocysteinemias. That is altogether different entities that we treated differently by giving homocysteine components, molecules, tablets. But otherwise, if you ask vitamin B12 how it is related to homocysteine, so it is definitely inversely related. and it is more thrombogenic. So that's why you have to treat as early as possible.
Right. So it's just something similar to cholesterol. Like cholesterol actually is, I think, directly deposited. The fat is directly deposited in the blood vessels. But homocysteine, if it is increased, if the levels are high, then it will lead to that deposition happening. Am I right
No,
in
it
saying
will
that?
actually basically it will act on the clotting system of
Okay.
the body,
Okay.
aggravate the production of clotting system factors, and it will form a clot.
So it helps in the formation of clot, which then blocks the artery,
Yes.
and that can then cause stroke.
Yes.
Right. What are the blood tests, or when we can say biomarkers? When we say biomarkers, so what are the biomarkers which we have to look out for when we are concerned about, when we are talking about stroke? Are there any such things?
So when it comes to a biomarker identification, so we do a lot of biomarker test for identifying the atherosclerotic process which is going on. So definitely in that we check for apolipoprotein A, apolipoprotein B, HSCRP. That is the most commonly identified biomarker for understanding the vascular risk factor. Like vascular risk factor means understanding the vascular atherogenetic process which is going on in the multiple organ. Not every time the one organ gets affected. Obviously, when you are aging, the atherosclerosis is affecting all the body
All the
system
organs.
arteries. So HSCRP is the primary a good indicator to identify the risk for getting heart attacks, risk for getting brain stroke, risk for getting any peripheral vascular diseases, what we call. That is called narrowing of the arteries of the limb. So that biomarker is definitely important in order to identify. And homocysteine, that is also important to identify the possibility of getting future recurrences or a future stroke occurrence. So these are the basic biomarkers we look for. These are the blood tests what we do. We do certain sonographic tests also. That is something called as the carotid Doppler to look for arteries which are coming from the heart going to the brain. These are the carotid arteries. Whether the arteries are narrowed. If the arteries are narrowed, the risk of recurrence of the stroke is more if the blockage is more than 60%. So periodic carotid Doppler can also be a screening test for identification of the candidate, those who are at the risk for getting stroke.
Right. And these biomarkers, when we are talking about biomarkers, so these are essentially blood tests. So we check for the levels of something like HSCRP, the one you said. Cholesterol, everybody knows, but homocysteine we discussed right now. Then what is HSCRP?
HSCRP is high sensitivity, what you call CRP levels in the body. So that is nothing but the inflammatory marker. Just for understanding common population, it is very difficult. What we are talking, it is at cellular level. So I'll be just making that thing very simple. At every neuronal levels, means where the neurons are there or the cells are there, there you have something called as the inflammatory processes going on and anti-inflammatory. So when the HSCRP comes, which is one of the inflammatory marker, if that marker is high, the chances of having clot formation tendency of the patient is more because of more inflammation going on at the cellular level. So limiting that, reducing HSCRP by reduction of the weight, limiting your addictions, stopping the addictions, and the regular exercises, definitely we can bring those levels down. So treating HSCRP is especially important in the patients, those who are having high levels of HSCRP, in order to prevent all the vascular events which are occurring with respect to different organs of the body.
Right.
So basically everything, I think when we are looking at it from a bird's eye view, everything is pointing to something happening and then a clot being formed somewhere in the blood vessel. So that is giving rise to stroke. So we try to find out how we can diagnose it, or what can we look for in the blood work to see if the patient might have stroke. So this is about detecting stroke. This is about finding out. But what about prevention? Can we take generally in our lifestyle? What do you recommend to prevent anything from all these things from happening?
Before we go ahead for the prevention, I'd like to add one more thing in this. You asked one question to Dr. Aarti saying that how do you detect the stroke? I mean, blood biomarker is one thing, that is for sure, you know. But the warning signs that we keep talking to people, you know, I think in my practice, I think what I feel it is more of a retrospective diagnosis. You know? Very few people come with this, suppose, I mean, whatever, bed fast, B fast, whatever, you know. I mean, those are warning signs, but and they last for very, very few seconds because they're transient and you get better. And many times you try to justify saying that, you know, I may have worked overnight, you know, I'm very tired, you know, I was on the computer for 10 hours. That's why probably must have got blurring of vision, or I slept like this, that's why I got some tingling numbness. So these are the warning signs coming from the brain for sure. But how much importance people give to that warning signs, it's a very, it's not very common. Am I right? Yeah?
That is true. Absolutely true.
And when they come to us in the clinic or with a proper stroke, and when you ask them that, have you ever had this problem? That time he'll tell you, oh yeah, since 3 months I have been having this problem. So generally, the whole idea of this exercise, that Aditya, is to make people aware that if you get the warning signs, don't try to justify them. You run immediately to a neurologist. We try to justify, you know, why I'm getting tingling and numbness, you know, why I'm getting little weakness, why I'm getting speech difficulty. We try to justify all those things. Don't even try to do that. This is a warning sign. Reason could be anything, but this is a warning sign coming from the brain, and your job is to rush to a closest neurologist. Period. Nothing more than that. Then you don't tell us that this is a weekend or it's a long weekend, doctor may not be there, you know, I mean, he may leave. Don't try to do that. Don't try to justify. If you have a weakness, it has improved in after 15 seconds. Reason could be anything, but it is ultimately related to the brain. You know, and your duty is to come and report to the neurologist as fast as possible.
Sometimes it happens also. No, the patient has come. Patient had a paralysis. It recovered, as sir said. Patient is reaching also to us. We are doing evaluation. The scan comes normal. That is also one situation where the patient is saying, "Madam, scan to normal hai, goli kyun khana hai?" So in that situation, the understanding of the patient is also important. That patient has already suffered a small brain stroke, and we are giving a medicine in order to prevent the future attacks of the brain. Otherwise, if they have to take any medicine for a longer duration of the time, they end up saying, "ये medicine तो खाने की ज़रूरत ही नहीं है, क्योंकि अभी तो मैं ठीक हूँ." But they are not understanding the future repercussion of the diseases. So understanding, doing exercises of whatever we are doing, that stroke awareness, is to create basically awareness amongst the common population to understand the disease pathology, and whatever treatment is recommended by us to take and to be adherent with the treatment. And just for a risk factor evaluation, we have to manage those risk factors. So understanding the whole concept of the stroke is very much important.
I'll tell you a story which happened about just 2 weeks ago. She's a young lady, 34 years young lady, stays in Badlapur. तुम्हारे गांव की है, बदलापुर की. And 2 weeks older, not more than that. 2 weeks ago, she was making a breakfast for her husband. You know, she had some tingling numbness on the right hand, which lasted for about 5 to 10 seconds. So she jatkofied her hand like that, you know. And after 10 seconds, she became all right. She did not tell anybody. She served the breakfast with children, husband, everything happened. The whole day she was completely normal. Next day, again while she was making the breakfast, this time she had a speech trouble. She could not speak properly, and this hand became weak. The things started falling down from the hand. And that time she reported to her husband. Husband took her immediately to a hospital in Badlapur. She was admitted. The doctor over there in Badlapur understood this is a brain stroke. They don't have MRI there. You know, he did a CT scan in Badlapur. CT scan was completely normal. CT scan in early stages of the brain stroke can be completely normal. You know, it might take some time to develop, see the changes of the CT scan. So she was sent to Kalyan for MRI. You know, so she went to MRI. MRI showed a proper small pea-sized infarct, which would explain her speech and right hand weakness. By the time she came back to Badlapur, 5 to 6 hours, and she improved completely again. So first time, the whole thing lasted for 10-15 seconds. Second day, it lasted for about 5 to 6 hours. By the end of 5 to 6 hours, next day she was completely all right. And they had done the MRI angiography also. The MRI angiography showed some break in one of the blood vessels of the brain. She was referred to us next day. We got her admitted. We did the angiography. And in angiography showed one of the arteries is not filling properly. The blood flowing through the artery is very, very inadequate. So I said, you require angioplasty. The question she asked me surprised me. You know, she had witnessed 2 episodes of this problem. MRI shows an infarct. Angiography shows there is a block in the artery. I mean, what more you want? Yeah. She asked me one question: Can I get this done 1 year later? I asked her one question. Suppose you get a heart attack. Okay? Will you delay by 1 year or do it immediately? No, heart hai na, so we'll do it immediately. But what wrong brain has done? And you have suffered twice. I mean, this is the awareness index that we have in our country. I mean, forget people who don't know about brain stroke, but those who have suffered with a brain stroke also, they are not willing to get the treatment done properly. You know?
And when you describe the whole episode, so in that there were 2 attacks which were transient. You use the word transient. So I think people need to understand, why are they transient? Why is the thing coming, the attack coming and then going away? Why does that happen? Why is it transient in nature? Shouldn't the blood supply, once affected, stay affected?
Sometimes the blood vessel goes into spasm.
Okay.
For that particular time. And there are many other things also. There's something called the collateral reserve, collateral circulation, the blood which is coming from the peripheries. So for that particular time, that blood vessel might go into spasm, and that's why, and if this blood coming from other vessels also is inadequate, I'll have a problem, So that is one of the explanation which is given. I'm sure Aarti must have some other explanation also for this.
I would just like to add one. Definitely what Sir has said. So the collaterals in the brain, it's a big concept. So we have a lot of literatures on the collaterals. Collaterals means what? In the brain, we have got a unique circulation where the anterior part of the brain is getting supplied by posterior part or the posterior arteries, or the posterior arteries are getting supplied by anterior arteries via communicating arteries. So this is nothing but the whole channel system of the brain, which is unique. It is God gifted. No one else has it. Means no other organ in the body has that, what you call something called as auto-regulation, which is going on in the brain. None of the organ. If the God has made brain in such a way, definitely God must have thought of something. Means the scientifically, if you see, the scientific reason for making this auto-regulation, or what you call something called as developing collaterals, in order to prevent the brain trauma. So whenever the brain gets damaged because of the stroke process, at that time there is a damage to the brain. When there are collaterals which are there, means there is a supply which is coming from the opposite side, it can prevent the damage to, further damage to which is happening to that part.
So one area of the brain
Gets
is
supplied
not
from
necessarily supplied just by one blood vessel.
Yes, it is
It
supplied
can
by
be
the other
supplied
territories.
by multiple blood vessels, and that is why when one blood vessel stops working, then the other blood vessels take over. And that is why at that time that attack comes and goes away. But then naturally another
There is
question
one
is,
more pathophysiology behind that. See, collaterals, why it is important? If the person who is having a good collaterals, the recovery from the stroke is much better. One thing. Now your question is why the episodes are happening transiently. Definitely the auto-regulation collateral phenomenon is there. Second, what said, when the vessel gets injured, there is a vasospasm. There is a reaction of the blood vessel to that injury by getting the vessel narrow, that we call as vasospasm. There is something called as the fighting between the clotting factor and anti-clotting factor. When you get an injury, for example, your hand has got cut and the blood has started coming out, definitely the body's clotting system and anti-clotting system which is there, both are active. Now the clotting is active, anti-clotting is active, that's why blood is flowing. Now the body's system understands that the blood is flowing, we have to stop that blood loss. So anti-clotting system is playing a role. In stroke, what happens is the clot has formed, means the clotting system is active. Then the anti-clotting system has to override over the clotting system. It tries to dissolve the clot at the natural level, at the physiological level. So sometimes the clot forms, it gets automatically disrupted. Sometimes it happens in the cardiac vessels also. The patient gets the heart attack, but if you do the angio, the angios are clear.
So the body basically tries to get rid of that clot,
that clot.
by
That
itself.
is by natural mechanism.
by natural
Natural
mechanisms.
When it does not get rid of it, then we have to treat such kind of patient. So this TI is what we say, na, that is happening because of all these three things which are happening at the level of the blood vessel where the clot is forming. So we are talking about the maybe microscopic or a macroscopic level. All these things are happening, and the patients are getting the episode. That what we call as the clinical presentation of the disease.
Right. And the thing is, when we said that one part of the brain has multiple blood supply, right? So why do we need to worry about the artery which is clotted?
Because that is the major artery which is supplying the brain.
Okay, right. Yeah, because that.
Because the damage would be, see, all patients will not have a good collaterals. Why we emphasize more on doing exercises, patient those who exercise 30 minutes in a day, good cardio workup, they have a good collateral channeling in the brain. Patient those who are not exercising at all, they don't have collateral channels in the brain. It is very simple as a simple textbook reading. So if the person is not exercising, if he is getting stroke, the damage is more. If the person is exercising and if he is getting stroke, the damage is less and the recovery is faster. So emphasis for all stroke patients and the patients those who are likely to be at the risk factor, and for every individual, I always focus on doing exercises because of the collaterals phenomena, what is important in the brain.
See, that is what Dr. Arti is trying to say, that everything depends upon what is collateral reserve, what you call it. That's a separate word for that. I have seen patients when one artery is fully blocked, but they're walking on the road without any problem. You know, why? Even if one artery is completely blocked, he has got such a good collateral circulation that is taking over the blood supply coming from this artery. When do I get stroke? When my collateral circulation is poor. You know, we have 4 arteries which supply blood to the brain, and 2 are going from here, 2 go from the back of the head. So all these 4 arteries, when they enter inside the brain, they form a kind of a circle. You know, so there is a lot of overlap into the circulation. That is what is collateral circulation. Now, if collaterals are poor, then I can get a stroke, despite having all the 4 arteries open. But if my collateral circulation is very poor, a slightest change, like what happens in transient attack, when the vessel goes into spasm for a few seconds, I will get stroke-like symptoms.
And ma'am, when you're saying exercise improves collaterals, so which exercises are these? Are these strength training exercises or are they aerobic exercises?
I think I would say more of a aerobic cardiac exercise is what we say, na?
Okay.
That will improve the strengthening of the brain as well as heart. So one should focus on more doing cardio exercises or doing aerobics more than the strength.
More than strength
Definitely
training.
strength training is the part, but the 80% of the exercises should be focused on doing cardiac exercises and the aerobic exercises. So that improves your circulation to any body organ. Because here we are discussing about stroke, so definitely the brain circulation gets better.
Okay, so it improves the overall. So there are collaterals like in brain, there are collaterals in heart also.
Everywhere.
But the
And-
collateral system in the brain, what we say, the auto-regulation, that phenomenology is only seen in the brain.
Right. So maximum number of collaterals are there in the brain. I'm
You
assuming.
can generate your collaterals by doing exercises. That's
really.
what
So
I'm saying.
so exercise generates these blood vessels.
More and more formation of the. So exercises generates a phenomenology of vasogenesis, where a
Okay.
lot of blood vessels are forming and they're forming a networking. So that is called as what you call vasogenesis. More and more blood vessels are formed and they're giving more supply to the brain.
Which is very unique to the brain, by the way.
And this happens at any age. At any age.
It happens generally in the younger age group, but in older age group, if you're already doing exercises, that is the preserved phenomenology. So the brain's, what you call the adaptability capacity gets better. So if you're already a person who is doing regular exercises and if you're getting stroke in the older age group and if you're continuously doing those exercises in the later age group, the impact of the stroke on your brain would be lesser as compared to a person who is not doing anything.
Okay. Because say suppose somebody did not exercise until they were like 60 or something. But after that they take their health seriously and then they start exercising. So will those collaterals develop then?
Maybe at that time they might not develop, or maybe they will develop at the start, because definitely the part of aging is also playing a role at that time. So that's why the focus on should be on having a healthy life right from the beginning. A lot of youngsters also nowadays, they are more busy with their work, more busy. If I'm telling somebody to do exercise, even for a migraine patient, madam, time nahi hai, that is the answer. And even though if you have a time, you're not doing it. That is also one thing. So main focus should be on exercise throughout your life. It is not like that after 60, when you get a risk factor, you will exercise. That should not be the scenario. You should daily exercise for 30 minutes, at least 5 days in a week. That is definitely helpful for your body in the long run.
See, there is no anti-aging drug. Once you reach 60 means you are 60. By doing anything, you are not going to become 50. And atherosclerosis, the word that has been used repeatedly. In a layman's language, atherosclerosis is just hardening of the arteries. It's an aging process. With the age, your hair becomes gray. You develop cataract. You get arthritis. Same way, the arteries also age. They become hard. So at the age of 60, even if I do exercises, my chance of getting collaterals are very poor, which can happen in the age of 25. So what the artist is trying to say that this exercise has to be a continuous phenomenon from the young age onwards. If you say that at 60 I'll start exercising and I'll become young, or my arteries are going to develop collaterally, that is not going to happen.
Okay, maybe that is like a scenario on the far end of the spectrum. But let's say now people see this podcast, now they want to start exercising, they're 30, 35. Will that help in generating collaterals?
Definitely, why not?
At 30, 35. So there is a lot of motivation in starting exercise.
Lot of scope.
Lot of scope.
Everyone should
even
exercise.
if they start at 30, 40, maybe 40.
See, this age in a 60, 65 is good for Kentucky chicken, because 65 we started Kentucky become an international success, not for health. And for the health, I think you got to be doing right from beginning.
As it as possible.
Yeah. And on a consistent basis.
But even if you start at 40, it won't be in vain.
Yeah, obviously not.
You have to start right from the today.
Because
we just give that message to the viewers.
Because what happens is that then somebody might think, I should have started at 20, but now I'm 40. But maybe
It's
now it
never
won't
too
happen.
late. It's never too late. For sure.
Right. And so we were talking about exercise is a part of prevention. So what other things to do? Like say, for example, diet. What do you think is the most ideal diet? Because you use the word inflammation. So, and there are a lot of things on the net. They say this diet is inflammatory diet. This diet is, not inflammatory, is healthy for you. So what is that golden diet or, the best diet?
That which we don't follow. So the golden diet is called as in our Hindu rituals, what we call as Shuddha Satvik Jevan or Shuddha Satvik Khana. So when it comes to a diet management, one should have a lot of fruits. At least they should have 3 different fruits in a day. They should have nuts also in the morning time. One should have different types of what you call cereals in their life. Means in whatever the lunch, dinner, then every time they should not have a wheat made this. There should be a variation. You can use bajri, nachni, you can use ragi or maybe oats, and definitely limited use of carbohydrate. No carbohydrate, there should not be any diet where you are not consuming carbohydrate because the brain lives only on the glucose. When it comes to a neurological patient management, we always focus on giving heavy breakfast to our patients. Why heavy breakfast? Because overnight the brain has not taken anything. You are fasting overnight because you are sleeping during that time. Your brain is resting. Morning moment you get up, your brain needs extra charging. And this extra charging is important for the brain in order to regulate the other body organs. That time you should eat maximum morning time. Whatever energy, calories you want to give, you should give it at that time. And there should not be any diet where you are cutting down your carbohydrate morning time only and you are not eating anything. That should not be the case. So the morning breakfast should be heavy for all the patients, especially for the patient those who have neurological issues like migraine, epilepsy, stroke, dementias. If you want to take a dinner light by 7 o'clock early, you just want to take a soup, salads, that is okay. The breakfast has to be heavy because your brain needs charging and the brain lives only on carbohydrate. So that is glucose. That's what we are talking about. So the glucose going to the brain and reaching in the brain to work, definitely your breakfast has to be heavy.
Okay, this is interesting
Anything you want
because
to add, sir?
Yeah, what she said is correct. I want to add one thing. I don't know whether we said that in last podcast. Brain uses only glucose and oxygen for survival. Brain does not do anything else. Brain is not like your digital gadgets. Once you charge and your mobile works for 24 hours, brain needs a constant charging. Constant. For one reason that brain does not store glucose. Like liver stores glucose, your bone stores calcium, your protein stores, a muscle stores proteins. So if my body requires calcium, I can always extract it from the bone. If my body requires more protein, I can always take it out from the muscles. Or if my body requires glucose, I can take it from the liver. But brain has no depots. There is no storage capacity of the brain for the glucose. So that means the brain needs a constant charging, constant glucose, unlike your digital apparatus. And this glucose and oxygen reaches brain only through the blood supply. So by any means, your blood supply is interrupted by any means. That means your brain is not getting glucose and oxygen enough quantity. And that probably 6 to 8 minutes. And if the brain does not get this nutrient for 6 to 8 minutes, the story is over there. And that is where the stroke begins.
okay,
Yeah. So what she said, a good heavy breakfast, early dinner, this is a necessity. Because otherwise the brain will not have constant supply of glucose.
yeah, but like having a heavy breakfast is provided you have a light dinner, right? Your dinner should be light and early, preferably. Usually people have dinners at like 10 or 11. But is that right?
Youngsters have the lunch at 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. Yes. I mean, how do they work, these youngsters? They work till 4, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Day starts at the plot.
their day starts at 12 o'clock. The breakfast is at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Lunch is at 10 o'clock.
Exactly.
I mean, what kind of rhythm is this?
So that is definitely harmful.
And the whole night goes on what, Red Bull and stuff like
Energy
that.
drinks.
So, since you're talking about nutrition to the brain, I think we got to be a little more serious about this. Yeah, it is as important as the exercise is important for the brain and the heart. It is equal importance. There's no question about
But
it.
then, okay, if we are having an early dinner, having heavy breakfast is all right. But what I want to know is that is fasting important? Because this question we have asked to almost all the guests, and we want to know their opinion on fasting, because nowadays a lot of times a lot of articles are there on internet. A lot of people advocate intermittent fasting. So
Yeah, they talk about 17 hours fasting. I heard that.
16 hours fasting,
Yeah, 17 hours. Somebody has
16, 17, 18 hours
come to
fasting.
meet me once. So I offered him a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, after 2 o'clock, nothing.
Uh-huh.
I said, then what? Well, the next day. Okay, what do you do for? No, my body is used to that.
Mm.
I said, what are you talking? Your body is used to that, but your brain is not used to it. And one day you will definitely going to get a lesson if the brain does not get enough glucose. I mean, he eats, he has a breakfast. After that 17 hours, this guy does not eat anything.
It's very common.
Very common
these
It has
days.
become trained nowadays.
It has become a trend, yeah.
So where my brain is going to get the glucose from?
So-
I'll get the oxygen, but where the glucose will come
So
from?
people should not do this.
I'm not very sure about that.
No, people should never do this, I feel. But that
Fast
is not
for-
a right way. Means, see, if you're taking early dinner, the concept of taking early dinner is to have the gut rest. Means your gut should rest when you're sleeping. Your gut should not be exercising, means should not do the digestion work when you're sleeping. That is the additional stress on your body organs. So that's why the concept of early dinner has come that 7 o'clock you're finishing your dinner. So the within 1 or 2 hours, the peristalsis is over, the gut digestion, everything is over. And all body organs are going into the peaceful rest. And that rest is important for your body. And the rest should be taken only at the night time. That needs to be understood by all the generation of people.
Mainly for the brain.
Yes.
Mainly for the brain.
So the 8 hours of sleep is mandatory for any
And that too
individual.
at night time only. You don't want anybody sleeping.
No.
even 10 hours during the day, that is of no use.
Right.
And the 3 meals are important. Definitely breakfast, lunch, and the dinner. If you want to take a dinner as a light dinner, that is okay. But the intermittent fasting, I don't think so. We should endorse that also.
Yes.
And
don't think so.
a lot of people, they have a lot of this. But scientific explanation for understanding body's pathophysiology is body needs continuous supply of nutrients. When the body is not getting it, especially the brain will give signals. When the people are doing intermittent fasting, we have seen a lot of patients, even the doctors are doing intermittent fasting just to reduce their weight. They end up coming to the neurologist. We see such kind of patients. We are getting headache issues. We are getting trouble in understanding, focusing, doing multitasking, focusing, concentration issue. Everything comes from the brain. The brain is giving you the signals you are not understanding. It is happening because of your diet. First, you change the diet. Moment you change the diet, you change your sleeping pattern. You understand your body very well. That time, all the problems, they naturally get resolved without giving medicines. So, telling such patient to change the lifestyle also, it is very much important. So, as a neurologist, we do that also. And most of the patient in the natural course of the disease, they recover without giving medicines.
Okay, but the thing is,
not after you use lifestyle, I think that has to be taken with the right perspective. What we feel is brain stroke, heart attack is largely because of your disease lifestyle. Atherosclerosis is not a disease. It's just an aging process, which is going to happen to all of us. All of us are going to become old. But his lifestyle is the one thing which creates his natural aging process into a disease. That is exactly. And in the lifestyle, what she is trying to say that nutrition, exercise, they are very important aspects of lifestyle. I mean, once you go haywire from there, obviously you're going to pay for it.
but the thing is that like there is a daily recommended dietary allowance for proteins. Like you should consume this amount of proteins in a day, for example, which is recommended. So, is there any recommended amount of carbohydrates which should be consumed in a day? Like you said, people should not go on low carb diets, right? So, carbs should not be very low. Usually, people take a lot of carbohydrates, even that is unhealthy. But what is the recommended amount then?
I don't know the number, Ati, but I can tell you one thing. I mean, it all depends on what is your kind of work you have. The Matari workers who lift 100 kgs of gunny bags, 50 in a day, probably their requirement is totally different than a guy who's sitting in an air-conditioned office for 16 hours and working on the laptop and telephone. I think
it should be individualized as a patient's requirement.
And say, for example, somebody wants to do this intermittent fasting, but has taken enough carbohydrates when that person is eating, then is it all right?
First of all,
They are not limiting their carbs. They are taking adequate amount of carbs for their physical activity. But then they are fasting. Will that help?
overall intermittent fasting itself will going to damage the body organ.
I suppose so.
Long run.
I suppose so.
Maybe it will be okay for a few days or a month so, but in the long run definitely it will affect the important body organs. So better to take a nutritious diet. Don't do too much. Take it in the adequate quantity, and just it should be the combination of all. As I said, the fruit should be there, the nutritious things, and avoid junk food. That's it. So it is not very difficult. It is not a rocket science.
Correct. And it's what is talking. It's a I think moderation in everything. I mean, what we had in the past, what were the Vedic sciences, the fasting during festivals and things like that. I think there's a different story behind it, But nowadays, I think with the things are changing too fast, I don't think that fasting is something which your body will tolerate. There are too many things that have come up as a risk factor to the brain stroke, apart from the air pollution, the stress, which wasn't heard of many years ago. And probably that time fasting for during the festival, fasting for some purpose probably had some significance. But now with all this thing happening, I don't think you should add one more factor to the risk factor which are already existing. That's what I feel. And this fad, I call this a fad. 17-hour fasting, 18-hour fasting. Now after that, what? After 8 hours fasting, you're asking for dialing Swiggy and McDonald's and asking for that kind of
That
food.
is a general idea. That is so
Yeah,
that people can
I
eat
never
whatever they
understood
want.
that. I never understood that. I mean, where I stay, I see people who are obese to an obscene level and carrying tires on their head and the shoulder and running on the road. Why are you doing this? The previous night, probably you had this kind of a dinner brought from outside. You want to burn the calories now?
That is what they
You know,
generally do.
my parents were farmers. Now we don't get people to work for. I said, always tell them, go and work in the farm for 1 month. You don't need to carry tires on your shoulder.
You'll automatically lose weight.
Automatically, you lose the weight. It's like going to a temple and asking for the dog, please forgive me. I have done a lot of sin last month. So just forgive me this month. That is what is coming to. Why do you think so?
Also, one more out of curiosity, I'm asking this is that when a patient comes to you and you diagnose it with stroke, how many percentage of those patients require surgery? Just an average.
Will be less than 10%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
So most of them can be managed medically.
Mass, yes.
Okay. So I think that is important for people to know because they don't need to think that now they have got paralysis. Now the only thing that can save them is surgery. They can be managed medically.
In fact, most of them are managed medically.
Okay. But when we are saying medically, so for example, if there is a block in one of the blood vessels, will the block completely go away? When you're saying we manage it medically,
So, any stroke patient, when they come to us, we always make a clinical diagnosis. Clinically means we have seen the patient, we know that patient has got a stroke. First thing what we do is neuroimaging, imaging of the brain. So, in that either we do CT scan, that is CT scan of the brain with angiography, or we go for a MRI brain and angiography. Purpose of doing angiography is to understand which artery of the brain has got blocked. And purpose of doing MRI brain or a CT brain is to understand what type of stroke is there. It is a ischemic stroke, means the clotting is there, or a brain bleeding is there. Brain hemorrhage, what we call as. At the same time, to understand what is the damage, whether the damage is mild, moderate, severe, accordingly we grade. Once the diagnosis is confirmed, then patient has got a arterial blockages, what we call as ischemic strokes. So in such cases, we use something called as the clot buster injection. So it causes the clot lysis, and the clot gets dissolved because of that injection.
so there is an injection
Yes,
which when given within the right
4.5
time,
hours from the
Okay.
onset of stroke.
it can completely remove the clot.
Yes.
Right. And then
So the timeline is very much important. The purpose of understanding the brain stroke is to understand the time. The person has only 4.5 hours only to reach to a neurologist where we can use these injections if the patient has a blockage or a clotting in the brain. That injection is given only within 4.5 hours. Understanding the risk factors, understanding the contraindications and the indications for the stroke. Once the injection is given, we see for an improvement. So, idea of giving injection is to prevent the brain damage. As sir said before also, like every minute your 1.9 million neurons are dying if the stroke is happening in the brain. This 1 hour if you are waiting at home, 120 million neurons are dying for 1 hour. So if we are reaching to a hospital, we are giving a clot buster injection. So the damage which is happening to the brain area, we can minimize that damage. But whatever damage has happened, by the time you have diagnosed, reached hospital, investigation, that will take a time for an improvement. Once the injection is given, when we see for a recovery, and the recovery happens not immediately in most of the patients. In few patients, it happens within a time span of 3 months. So we always wait for a 3 months after giving that injection. If the stroke is big, then we have something called as interventional procedures, where after the 4.5 hours, if the patient is coming to us and if it's a large stroke or a large artery in the brain is blocked, then we go there inside in the artery by doing some procedure, which is nothing but the guide wire we pass through angiographically. and we see which artery is blocked, and we try to take out that clot by doing suction or by putting the devices. And once that is done, then the patient comes out of it. So that is not needed for all the patient. It might be needed around 20-30% of the patients what we see. But most of the patients can be managed only by giving that clot lysis injection. But provided patient is reaching to us within 4.5 hours.
So, provided the patient first rushes to the hospital, gets a scan because scan is important.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't give that injection. And does all this within 4.5 hours. So then the chances of minimizing post-stroke damage is very good.
Yes.
And what about those who don't? What about those who delay it?
So those patients, those who delay it, do not come to the center or do not reach to a neurologist. Maybe in such kind of patients, we cannot give such kind of injections. What we do, we just manage them by giving blood thinners or anticoagulant injections or managing their blood pressure, something like that. These are what you call second line therapy, not the first line therapy is what we manage as stroke patients. So the second line treatment we start for the patient, those who are not reaching to us within the time, or maybe we use certain injection which can prevent further damage which is happening out of the brain stroke. So that is what we give to the patient, those who are coming later.
Now, since we're
Earlier is better, always we say.
always, since you're talking on a timeline, what we actually at the brain line, we want to go still beyond this. Ideally, all over the world, 3 to 4.5 hours is a time where you can do the thrombolysis, where you can use this clot busting medicine. Or after 5-6 hours, then there are certain post-renal, as Dr. Atke was saying. But at Brainline, we want to achieve something different. There is something called a door to needle time. That means if I get a symptom now and the duration where I am going to get this drug clot busting injection ideally should be 1 hour. Door to needle time. If that can happen in our country, I think most of the paralysis can be prevented. I mean, that's why people say 80 to 90% stroke can be prevented. That is because they have to reach us towards in time. Now, to do that, what we are doing at the Brainline, that we are trying to develop these centers in the periphery, where the person doesn't have to really come to the, rush to the city for the treatment. They can go to a center which is next door. If that can happen, then obviously the incidence of brain stroke will definitely come down. There is no question about that. So, golden period which we defined is up to 4.5 hours. We are trying to develop that into what is called door to needle time, which is ideally 1 hour. That 1 hour also, how 1 hour? Because the patient reaches the hospital, we examine the patient, get a CT scan done, see whether he is eligible for what kind of treatment. Everything is done within 1 hour. So that is the only way and most effective way where this progression of stroke can be prevented. Because Brother Aarti was saying, every second that you delay in doing the treatment, the billions of neurons are dying. And in brain, once the cells die, they do not regenerate. They don't come back.
So basically in this Brainline project, what we are trying to do is creating awareness amongst the common people, amongst the healthcare worker, creating a networking channels to identify the stroke as early as possible and to establish the stroke ready centers so that patient can reach. If the patient is in the Alibag, we will not ask that patient to come to Navi Mumbai in order to take a treatment. We will establish a stroke center at Alibag so that the patient could be treated there and the traveling time will also be saved. And the what you call the door to needle time or maybe the stroke thrombolysis time would be lesser. So the entire project is behind that and the efforts are taken all around this in order to establish the stroke ready centers in the vicinity.
And ma'am, since you mentioned that a majority of the cases can be treated medically, so now to reduce the time, can somebody just do a teleconsultation and talk to you on a video call or something? And if you tell them, okay, you're having a stroke, So, and you give your prescription. So, will that reduce time? Has it reduced time in your experience?
Definitely, why not? Because all these exercises we have already done. See, I have worked in the peripheral area of what you call Raigad, Ratnagiri, where a lot of centers which we have identified, where they have a basic imaging facilities like CT scan. We don't need MRI and all. There are few centers which are equipped with MRI also. So the main consultant or a physician from that area is giving me a call saying that the patient has come, patient has this much paralysis, we have done the imaging. They are sharing those reports to me on the WhatsApp or on the email. We are seeing and we are just advising them to go for a thrombolysis. They are only doing everything with the patient. Means they are doing thrombolysis, they are doing post thrombolysis, stroke care management, rehabilitation of the patient. But I am in the loop channel.
Okay.
So the advice comes from me, and accordingly they are acting on it. So that can also be done, and it should be done. It should be done by most of our colleagues. That's what I recommend. They should do it, and they should improve the healthcare facilities which are happening in the periphery. In fact, every physician should get connected to the neurophysician. That is my personal opinion. Sometimes that hesitation comes whether to call or not to call, whether to thrombolyze, not to thrombolyze. That should not be the case. The doctor to doctor communication should be very much appropriate and the prompt when it comes to the management. So a lot of doctors in the periphery, they still call, they manage patient. Once the patient is better, then they come to meet us also. That is what is also happening. But the networking, what we call now, that should be very strong. And the education of the person who is treating the patient there, at least he should have a baseline information, and the management techniques also he should know how to manage the further. Because every time it is not a golden story. Na? Sometimes patient can have complications also. Post thrombolysis, few of them they can have a bleeding in the brain. Few of them they worsen. So every time it will not go by a book. Sometimes there are complications which we have to tackle with. So that should be tackled with the good communication and the developing the patient trust, what is more important. So maybe the networking and understanding stroke by the doctors, those who are working in the periphery, that is very much important. And connecting that with the neurologist, whoever is available in that area, any neurologist is available or any neurosurgeon is available who is ready to take a call for a patient's management. So that connection has to be much better so that the patient can improve faster.
See, in a country like us, like India, where we have a paucity of the resources, we don't have some huge infrastructure to build, I think the WhatsApp has become a very important form of communication today. It happens in seconds. Everybody has this kind of thing on their phone. So I think this is one of the blessings that we have. We can get connected in milliseconds with the help of WhatsApp. Everything and anything.
Telemedicine definitely plays an important role. When it comes to the imaging reporting, means sometimes we are not sure what is happening. We have not seen the patient. We need a second opinion. We need radiologist help. So sometimes there are radiologists, those who are in the panel list when it comes to the management. So we always call the radiologist. Through telemedicine, the images are sent to the radiologist. Then we take a decision what needs to be done, what is better for the patient, what is not better for the patient. So I think that telemedicine is important tool nowadays for managing patient earlier and better.
So much.
Because I think all this makes sense. So all the doctors should be connected to each other. And if, let's say, there is some junior doctor who is posted in periphery and he wants to treat the stroke patient properly, he should be able to call somebody senior like you guys so that he will give that as right of a treatment as possible, even if he is sitting in the periphery. So I think that is what Brainline does then, because Brainline connects hospitals to a network.
It is not as simple as that. I think Brainline is definitely creating peripheral stroke centers, stroke ready centers, I would say. But there are requirements for these stroke ready centers. Not because I have a hospital or not because I'm a physician, I should start treating the stroke. There are certain requirements for that. Because Dr. Arti says that not every case is all green, I mean, sometime after giving this injection, there can be complications, There can be extra bleeding inside, or a patient may not improve any further. Sometimes the artery is completely blocked. You have given this injection, but until the artery is opened up, patient not going to improve. So there has to be a constant communication with the neurologist. If the patient doesn't get better with thrombolysis, you must suspect that there is some large artery block inside the brain. That's why your injection not working. In that case, there has to be a facility where that patient can be shifted to immediately to tertiary center. It's an active process. It's not that I give injection and sit, go to sleep, patient will improve. Nothing of that kind. You got to really follow that patient closely to see that whether any complications are developing, whether this patient requires a tertiary care. That particular physician has to be trained for it.
Right.
The nurses need to be trained for that. There has to be minimum CT scan inside. There should be an ICU. There are certain investigation should be there. So to make this peripheral center suitable to treat stroke involves a lot of training of people. Not every hospital can become a primary stroke care center. Am I right?
Yes.
And that is what you guys at Brainline are doing.
We have definitely do that. That is what we'll do.
Right. Sir, how do we identify stroke? What are the signs and symptoms of stroke?
Yeah, this question we had answered partially just before this. But as I said, this most of the symptoms are retrospective. Very few people I have seen rushing to the hospital with this kind of a warning signs and symptoms. But we have at Brainline, we have coined an acronym. It's called the BEDFAST. How it all began. I'll just give a little history. When this World Stroke Organization first started using these abbreviations for symptoms or warning signs, they just call it a FAST, FAST. That means facial deformity, arm weakness, speech problem, and the time. Then they thought that this is not going to be enough, so they added BE. So they started calling B fast. B is loss of balance and E for eye problems, and then the fast. In all that thing, see, the brain stroke is two types. One where the blood vessel ruptures causing brain hemorrhage. Other is like a heart attack where the blood vessel gets blocked, which is a majority cases which happen that way. But in that B fast, there was not a single thing which was covering about brain hemorrhage. So when you get a brain hemorrhage, you get a very severe headache and vomiting. It's a terrible headache, terrible headache. So we made B fast into BFAST. So we added one more T. Yeah. Now we see brain hemorrhage very often because my subspecialty in neurosurgery is about brain hemorrhage, which I have been doing since 1990. So one symptom which I have noticed in people with brain hemorrhage in hypertensive patients, that they get morning dizziness very often. When they get them in the morning, when they go to the washroom, suddenly they try to lose balance, try to hold on to something, That morning dizziness I've seen very often happening in people who get brain hemorrhage. So now we added D. So initially it was FAST, then it became BEFAST, B fast. And here we came in the picture. So we started calling BEDFAST. BEDFAST.
So a D has been added.
D has been added. Now we have gone little beyond this. I have realized this fatigue. I get very easily fatigued. I get very easily tired. In the background of my hypertension, my diabetes, other risk factors, I feel that fatigue also has become a very important precursor for the brain stroke. I have seen people, that they get very, very fatigued. That is maybe because of the loss of brain cells, I don't know what, but they get very tired. And 4 or 5 patients which came across got admitted under my care, they had a proper brain infarct after that. So this fatigue, post-stroke fatigue we have seen. Post-stroke fatigue, depression, anxiety, that we have seen. But in some few patients that we have seen, even fatigue coming as a precursor to the brain stroke. So now it is not BEDFAST anymore. It is now BEDFFASTT. So it's a bed fast now.
So now this fatigue, sir, you were talking about, this is without doing anything, without exerting oneself.
I'm not talking of usual fatigue that you get after working for 12 hours or after working, doing a hard
Exactly,
work.
exactly.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying people who already have the high risk to get either a heart attack or a brain stroke, if they start getting this kind of symptom, fatigue, I mean, very little bit of work and I get tired. I want to sit. I want to relax. I feel that's a very, very important precursor for the brain stroke.
So they just woke up in the morning and they felt
I mean, I have
a lot of
recently I had
fatigue.
4 or 5 patients where their prominent feature was easy fatigability. I mean, they get
Acha.
feel weakness.
Huh.
They don't feel like working. They get tired too fast. So that one thing we have added.
And
now.
that was the only thing, the only
I mean,
symptom.
they had other risk factors. They are diabetic, they are hypertensive. But the additional symptom, I think, put them at a risk for the brain stroke. I mean, recently I have come across this 4 or 5 patients like this.
Because fatigue as a problem, I think is faced by a lot of people these days. I feel fatigue
That's
because
what
of the
I'm saying.
constant
That is what I'm saying.
commuting, traveling.
I'm talking, and this generally happens in people who are 60, 70. Those who are not in active life, not active traveling, you are just doing gardening probably, maybe looking after the grandchildren. And this has happened so recently that and 4 or 5 patients came to me in this particular age group. Getting tired very easily without doing anything. So that's the acronym that BrainLine has coined. And in fact, we have Sedo patenting also now. So,
Bedfast.
Yeah. Bedfast.
And so there was one more acronym, BROLO.
Brolo is that's a BrainLine mission of BrainLine is Brolo. That is, brain only live once. So that is another thing that we have also signed for the patenting.
Right.
Shadows though we already have for the risk factors. So that we already have. So the 3 things that BrainLine he has coined for the first time, it has gone for the patenting, and I feel that describes the warning signs almost completely now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Awesome. And ma'am, I wanted to ask you this: how do we improve brain health?
Improving brain health, it's not a one-day phenomenon. Maybe it takes years of training of brain and developing channels, which we have already spoken about. So how one can have a good brain health is by doing daily exercises, at least 35 minutes of exercise, cardio exercises, aerobic exercises. If you can do yoga, meditation for 20 minutes, that is also enough for that mental synaptic connections of the brain to improve. Good healthy diet, avoiding addictions, means I would say no addictions. At the same time, the good 8 hours of night sleep, that is extremely important. Peaceful sleep when you wake up fresh in the morning. So that sleep is extremely important for an individual. At the same time, staying away from mobiles and the gadgets, laptops at night time, because that will cause more of a neurochemical disturbance in your brain. When it comes to improving brain health in the further aspects, you can learn multiple languages. See, like in India, we have so many languages. More than 30 languages are spoken in all over the India. So you can, wherever you are going, you try to learn the language. By learning the language, you can develop more synaptic connections in the brain. By doing the exercise, you can develop more collaterals in the brain. By using both the hands for doing activities, sometimes we say we are right-handed. We just use right hand for doing everything. But you start using your left hand also. This is the one technique by which your opposite side of the brain also gets stimulated. And in such scenarios, the patient, those are multilinguistic, means those who know multiple languages, more than 4 languages per se, if they know how to speak. Or the people, those who are ambidextrous, when they're using both their hands. See, the predominant hand might be different, but if the person is using both the hands for doing day-to-day chores, those patients, if they're developing stroke, the recovery of the stroke in those kind of patients is much better. Those who exercise, those who use both the hands, or those who have learned multiple languages. So this is what we call as cognitive training of the brain. And you have to train your brain in such a way that over a period of years, even though it gets damaged in particular situation, the recovery would be faster. See, happening an event to anybody, you cannot nullify that what you call the chances, but you can prevent the occurrence of the disease, and even though if it is occurring, you can minimize the effect which is coming out of it by doing all these techniques. And even in the old age, what I always tell my patient, try to be active mentally. Sometimes we say our parents, you are already 60 years, why you want to do this, why you want to work, you sit at home. That should not be encouraged to any of the individuals. Even though you are old enough, you should do your work. I have patients, those who are 90 plus, they are lawyers, they are judges, they are doctors, and I encourage them to still work. This is the way by which you can keep your brain healthy. The chances of getting neurological damage in the brain in any sort of the diseases, like in stroke, dementias, Parkinsonian disorders, what we say, the headaches, everything gets better when you're working and when you're having a healthy lifestyle. So training brain over a period of years, maybe it's a decades process, and one has to be consistent with it. It will not be done in the one day, that today I'm doing exercise, tomorrow I will not get a stroke, or the stroke would be of the complications would be lesser. It is not a scene. Maybe you have to do it over a period of years in order to get the results. And it is very much important for an individual to understand the brain health, why it is important. Because brain is the boss in your body and it controls all your body organs. And you need to give that much to your brain also in the back.
And what are the like parameters which we see for brain function? As in, if we do do these exercises and follow a good diet, what parameters will improve?
See, definitely the cognitive function of the brain improves. If you'll see, the things which you are doing initially in one particular speed, like for example, if I'm doing the daily chores of doing puja or maybe taking bath, if you're doing it in the 5 minutes, if you exercise, you can do it at the faster rate. The focusing capacity of the brain improves, the concentration improves, multitasking improves. As we say, patients are aging. What is the first thing comes when you are aging? That you cannot do multitasking. Moment you age, you cannot do 2-3 things together. But when you are young, you used to do 2-3 things together. So maybe that multitasking capacity improves when you are doing exercises on the regular basis. So definitely that improves. At the same time, the compensation power of the brain improves. Like sometimes after stroke, the patient loses the language when it is left-sided stroke. But if you're doing exercises regularly, if you're using your opposite side of the hand, the brain compensation for that particular insult also improves. So definitely that's what we see over a period of years. Definitely it is not a one-day process. It takes time to develop and one has to be consistent with it.
So ma'am, you mentioned languages. Can other things like some puzzle solving and exercises, will that help?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
It helps. Puzzle solving Sudokus, doing multitasking exercises. So when it comes to dementia, so here we are talking about stroke. As well as there's post-stroke, we encounter something as a post-stroke. Dementia also we see in a lot of patients. They lose their cognitive skills. So in such kind of patients, we give different multiple brain tasks like solving. Say it depends upon the patient's educational status, how much he is educated. So the educational qualification is good. We give them puzzles to solve. We ask them to write on the daily basis. We give them multitask, what you call games, where they have to pour maybe water from one side to another and using both the hands. Mirror activities we give them in order to improve. So definitely the higher cognitive skill improves by practicing. And the brain has to practice over a period of years, then it improves. So puzzle solving definitely helps. So in internet also, when we say, we ask patient to download certain games, like we have WoW game. So that WoW game is basically the puzzle solving game, which is available on if you see the stores, the Google store, that is available. You can download and we ask patient to play that in order to improve the cognitive capacity of the brain.
And any new thing in brain tries to learn, it develops new connections. Any new thing. If I don't know painting,
and that goes on for the whole life.
I mean, if I say don't know painting, if I start painting, if I don't know how to write with right hand or left hand, if I start writing with left hand, it will definitely help my brain to grow.
And there's no age limit for that. As
No,
in, even after 60, new connections develop.
I think every day we should start doing something new in order to improve our brain function.
But as you age, obviously, all this capacity of regeneration, reconnection, obviously also
decreases,
worsens.
but it will still help.
Yeah, it will help.
And the last thing, which I think a lot of us are guilty of, ignoring, is sleep, I think. Because while talking about improving brain function, you mentioned sleep. So why is sleep so important?
Sleep is extremely important for a brain health. A lot of youngsters are saying we are sleeping for 6 hours, that is enough and good quality of sleep. And actually they're sleeping from 1 o'clock to 8 o'clock or 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock. That should not be the timing. The sleep should be ideally happening for 8 hours minimum for an individual who is less than 60 years. Moment you age, the quality of the sleep gets disrupted and the duration of the sleep also goes down. And the latency of falling into the sleep increases. But for a youngsters, they should sleep at least for 8 hours. Why does the young child or a newborn infant who is there, who sleeps for 14 hours, 16 hours in a day? That is to improve the brain health so that more synaptic connections, more chemical release in the brain develops only at that time when the brain is resting. And the brain goes through the different cycles of sleep. The different cycles where the brain goes into NREM, REM type of sleep cycles. So sleeping is important in order to develop new neuronal connections, new synapses in the brain, and in order to nullify the chemical imbalance which is going on in the brain. Once that imbalance is stabilized, the patient can work much better the next day. Otherwise, the functioning capacity, fatigue, or maybe the tiredness, lethargy comes the next day. You all must have experience. If you are not sleeping, you don't get that focusing capacity or that much of energy you don't feel, or you feel lethargic. That's why the sleep is extremely important.
And is there an ideal time to go to sleep? Like you said, you can't go to sleep at 1 o'clock and then wake up at 8 o'clock and say, I have done my 7 hours of sleep. That won't help your brain function. So is there an ideal time?
Yes, definitely. Because scientifically, if you see, the sleep cycle initiated from hypothalamus, which is the part in the inner side which is there in the brain. It gives signal to your, what you call the sleep releasing hormones. The melatonin is the hormone which is released from the brain. Ideal release of that occurs around 10 to 11 o'clock at night time, when you are ideally to the bed, you're not using your gadgets and you are trying to sleep. And the release is naturally regulated overnight. Around 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, naturally in the body, the pituitary gland releases the surge of what you call the naturally happening steroids in the body. So they surge in the body and they further maintain the sleep pattern. So ideally you should sleep early and wake up early. So the early morning awakening will give you more of a, what you call, develop more of a neuronal or a synaptic connections in the brain. And if you're sleeping early and overnight, if you're able to maintain your sleep properly, if you're going through all sleep cycles properly, in that case, the brain rests much better and it will give you better productivity next day. So the sleeping early and waking up, sleeping early at night time is, if you're sleeping by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, waking up early in the morning, that is definitely beneficial when it comes to the brain health.
And how many sleep cycles? You mentioned cycles, and how many cycles are ideal?
See, it is not like that because every sleep cycles changes as per your age. So in what age group you are, accordingly it changes. So most of the time when you go into the sleep cycle, initial sleep stage cycle 1, 2, 3, the deeper stage of sleep, then you go into REM sleep. Like that 3 to 4 cycles occur throughout the night. The REM sleep when you are not idle, when your body moves or when your eyeballs are moving, but you are into the sleep. So not necessarily the person has to go through a specific sleep cycles. But sleep cycles can vary as per the surrounding atmosphere where you are sleeping, as per your age, and as per the timings. So it is not necessary that one has to go through this much sleep cycles. But generally 3 to 4 sleep cycles occur overnight.
Okay.
Yes. But it is different for different age group. For a pediatric individual, it is different. For older, it is different. For a middle-aged people, it is different.
Right. Okay, then thank you, Aarti ma'am, for enlightening us with all that knowledge about brain and how you can improve brain function, how you can take proper measures if anything like stroke is happening. Thank you for sharing all that knowledge with us. And once again, thank you, Ande sir. We already had a podcast once, and I think we'll try and do as many as possible to get as much information as possible. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.